the older I get, now 52, maybe 53, I can't remember which, but you know, you just come to the basic fact that you know, love is at the root, it's the source of everything in my thinking, and that really we are all manifestations of that love. And you know, when you see somebody beautiful walking, and there's light and there is wind and there's blood circulating through them, and you think, okay, my God, this creature that's in front of me is a miracle. That it's that the fact that we exist. You think about how many people have met how many people over how many times, over how many centuries, for you and I to be facing each other. I mean, then you're constantly living with the awareness that that life itself is a miracle, and that every encounter is a miracle, and that the force that protects us, really, love being that force, is a powerful, powerful force. It's as much a part of our instincts and evolution as anything. I think so. Even philosophically, theoretically, I think that there are arguments to be made about the importance and power of love in nature as a source of resilience. You know, evolution is oftentimes presented in terms of survival of the species as this battle between and against species, but really survival is not possible for anyone individually, especially over time. So I think this sense of deep connection, this sense of gratitude, this sense of unity, this sense of community, of belonging, of Louis, my dog, all of it is a life force, and it's a loving force. And I think that in terms of my work, especially since I do a lot of human rights work, you know, that's why I do it. It's almost a necessity. It's almost a command that if you love, then you will not permit certain things to take place around you. So I feel that love is also what is at the root of our conscience and the source of so much of our action. So there's that. And then, you know, you were talking about the marginal and impermanence and permanence. I was just, one of the characters in our film, Dogtown Redemption, was an African-American woman from Louisiana named Rosalind Sanders, who passed away recently. And I was just working on her obituary. And I remembered at the very end of the film, when the owner of Alliance Metals, which was the company that was the source of income for all the characters and underclass in Oakland, she kind of stuck her head through the grate of his door and said, "Don't you forget about us now." And I think that I've always thought that, you know, memory is also a fundamental building block of human civilization, human relationships. And so, so even with people who may manifest as homeless and marginal and impermanent, even in front of us, even as they exist, I think that there are ways in which we connect and bond, and that ability to remember, I think, is fundamental to our psyches as well, and to this notion that, you know, not everything is fleeting because of memory. I remember I was reading a lot of books about the Holocaust for a while, and there was reference to a child named Hubrinek who was born in a concentration camp and almost never acquired language, and was destroyed. And the only way in which he survived was through, I think it was Primo Levi's act of witnessing, remembering. So I think that there's a link between love and memory and connection and community, and I think those are some of the strands that inform, if anything informs what I do. Those are some of the things that have informed the work I've done.
And so what happens when there is suffering, when you do witness suffering either in yourself or in others? I mean, I wonder, yeah, what happens when you see injustice and, in this life, there is.
I mean, you're
More
injured. I think at basic level, you're injured by it. In the same way that if you see a car accident, you're injured by it. If you're connected, you're injured. It's not as though, such and such a person got killed and I can just walk away. And so I think that there's a duality to it, that you're injured by it, but you're also in a position to heal and to address it, kind of like a doctor would, or any person, a mother would, or a friend would. So, I mean, I think it's, I think there is two sides to it. I think there is a side to the world, to a capitalist system, and I seem to be going in this direction more and more, where empathy is killed almost systematically, right? You think of other people as resources and as things that you can use and consume and dispose of, and draw the value, extract the value out of others, and kind of spit them out and move on. And I find that repulsive, in a very profoundly repulsive, There's also, this we live in a kind of world where pain and distress are also sources of revenue, right? The more people are poor, the more predatory loans you give them, and the more you bury them in debt, the more you control them, and the more so I don't think we've really escaped the logic that drove us to enslave one another. We just do it through alternative ways and means. Collecting rent, extracting energy, labor, whatever. It's still quite, the systems and structures are still quite brutal. And that, again, makes love and just being human a remarkably radical force, right? I mean, we have in America right now millions of people who, because of the government's own poor handling of the epidemic, are exposed to health threats and financial threats, and then the financial threats translate into eviction and broken homes and all of these things. And the government, the Republicans can't agree on giving people $600. I mean, that's how bad it is. That's how systemic the failures are. And so I think that as institutions are subjected to this kind of capitalist logic of maximizing revenue and minimizing loss, right? The more, extracting more and offering less, we put people in that gap, right, where they have no standing, they have no security, they get no recognition, and this is a very dangerous and destructive cycle. So I think that if you're not, you're either responding to suffering or you're profiting from it.
And why do you think? Why do you think you would? I mean, I understand that you do profit from it, but what I understand is what do you think brings you to profit from it as a human?
Basically, if if someone is vulnerable, and you see it a lot. I mean, you see it. Look at China. Look at it at the global level. China's diplomacy has been described as debt trap diplomacy, meaning that you go into areas that are poor, you offer people something, money, whatever, but that money draws them into a relationship in which they are crippled, basically, and they are kept in that situation. And you strip them of their assets, you strip them of their resources, you strip them of their sovereignty. You take even more away from them in the name of helping them progress or in the name of development or whatever. You just saddle people with more and more debt, and debt that they can't pay back, and governments that are profoundly corrupt, and and these are very dangerous structures.
But why? What's the source of this? I mean, I understand. I understand that this is happening. I'm curious. What do you think is the source of
Cannibalism?
Cannibalism, and why do you think cannibalism is such a
because we basically want to take over, and if you start on the assumption that humans are predatory, or human systems that we've built are predatory, then predators thrive on, it's like lions and hyenas. I mean, they thrive on the corpse of other creatures. They devour them, they absorb their energy, and make that, and then so all this language about markets and territory, in some ways they're very primitive, brutal, foundational impulses, because we basically create predatory structures, whether it's the state or the corporation or the bank. They're all predatory. They can't all be very predatory because they are all premised on the collection and gathering of revenue of one kind. And the only way you can collect and gather the kind of revenue that these systems demand and desire is through the takeover of land and resources and populations and things of that nature.
Can you talk about control and put into context, talk about control and creation? How do you see the relationship between control and creation? If you see any relationship.
I mean, it depends on who's controlling what. If it's at the level of the artist, then there's, in any craft, there has to be some measure of control. Some process that guides the creativity, that refines it, that evaluates it, that monitors it and improves it and judges it, and kind of like what you were doing with your wood paintings, right? You can't just be creative without controls, right? So I think control is a part of creativity. knowing how much energy to apply where and things of that kind. But I think that there is another dimension of control and creativity, which is the tension between states and their people. And, states tend to want to have control and conformity and predictability and certainty. And the creativity by its nature is disruptive of all of those things. It's innovative, or it can be innovative, and it can challenge authority and the structures and the ways of doing things. So it depends, I guess, on the level of control that you are thinking about. I mean, it's obviously impossible to have any kind of civilization without some degree of control. You need certain laws, you need certain procedures, you need to have consensus and consent around certain norms, and those norms can then become the controlling norms. Like in the US, you have the Constitution. It in theory is what controls the government. It's it's how this system is designed. But at the same time, it has its flaws, slavery for one, or women not having the vote for another, and all of that. So if you are not able to challenge these systems and structures, they become or remain destructive or limiting. And I think that there's a way in which control is about putting limits, and creativity is about challenging those limits.
So maybe I tell you why I ask you this question.
Finally.
Because my personal feeling, I mean, there are two things, right? In relationship with your work, and I'm thinking about Dogtown Redemption. One thing that stood out for me was, and it might be an assumption, but I had a feeling that at a certain point, you were trying to find a home and a job to at least certain of the people with that were living on the street. Is that right, or is just an assumption to start with?
That I was trying to find the people there.
Maybe it was not you trying, but they were in a position where they could have or they had a stable home with a job. And the impression that I had from the movie was actually that they were missing the street. And it felt like there were two reasons, at least that's, but it can be a complete assumption, Amir, and please correct me if that's the case. And one was the sense of freedom that the street gave them. And the second one was their sense of solidarity that they had, or the sense of love. I don't know how to name it exactly, but something in the relationship that was missing when they had this stability.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think that with a lot of the characters who are in our film, they shunned that kind of permanence, that idea of a home as a permanent or stable place. In part because it never was, maybe in their lives, their homes were not stable or secure places for them. But it was also that, when you're in a home, you're really not just in a home. You're in a financial relationship with the world. You're in a bind, if you will. You have a mortgage or you have rent. And you also have an address, so you have a location, and all of those things. And when you're in a home, you're also confined. You're not, whereas so I think that for a lot of the characters in our film, there was that sense of freedom that came with being on the street. And like Jason was saying at that in the beginning of the film, the street's going to pay me. It's not the church, you know. It's we don't think of the street as an institution the same way that we think of, say, the church or the government or whatever. But the street has its own logic and its own play, and it's also full of life and full of encounters. And so it's kind of like the difference, if you will, between jazz and classical music, in that a lot of people's lives on the street was always a function of improvisation, constant improvisation. And that required an extraordinary amount of creativity and adjusting and being alert. And Jason would always say at the end of our film, you know, animals don't go for homes. You know, they live outside. They don't need all these shelters and structures and so on. Electricity, water, all of these things. So I think that there was, in a sense, there was a freedom that Jason had that none of us and the homeless have, that none of us do, because we're dependent on our homes for, you know, everything.
So why do you think we did make create this dependency to homes? Why do you think this passage happened or happens?
I mean, it's a profound question, because, I mean, in most, and certainly a lot of, and when you look at Islamic history, for instance, and somebody like Ibn Khaldun, he always talks about the clash between the settled type settlements, if you will, and the nomadic, the tribal, the raiders, and so on. And the settlements, the instincts for the settlement is usually some sort of surplus in terms of material wealth or agriculture, or, you know, you find a place that provides you with, you know, certain, whether it's water or good land or whatever, and then you want to inhabit it. You don't want to move as a function of your food or your needs. I mean, I think it's a primal tension within human beings between wanting somewhere to sit and then wanting somewhere to go, you know. And I think the sitting takes us towards settlement, and the walking takes us towards the kind of nomadism. It's almost physical, you know, it's almost physical. But then obviously, I mean, factors like security and language and faith and, you know, where your gods are. And I mean, look at, for instance, look at Israel, right? This 2,500 or however many thousand year quest of the Jewish people for a homeland, you know, as if, right, that it's as if we can ever find that kind of permanence where we are eternally secure and protected and not subject to pogroms and so on. I mean, I think part of the impulse for a home is just security, not being preyed upon by other bands and groups and tribes. You know, big questions, Artemis. I mean,
But it feels like at least for me personally, it feels like that's probably the reason why I'm so interested in impermanence right now. It feels like it's becoming more and more clear that this is not truth, right? It's impermanence, the truth of it feels like so it. And it's where freedom lies, right? Creativity lies, as you said. I think that's you mentioned, right? The constant creativity the characters of to adapt, and because they don't have the security of the home. Uh, so and freedom has an extraordinary taste, right? I mean, I understand that you may have not consciously chosen to live on the street, but when you do have the taste of freedom, it's something that is hard to let go of.
I think, Artemis, there are different freedoms. Because when you're also living on the street, you're also losing a lot of freedoms. When you live in a home, you have water and you have, let's say, a bathroom. You don't even think about the fact that you have those two things. But when you're on the street and you don't have either, and then let's say you don't have toilet paper, and then, it just gets, and then you don't have a kitchen, and then you don't, so I think we have to also be careful about romanticizing it, because in fact, it's almost there's a side to being on the street that's almost also permanent subjugation by these things. You still have the problem of eating, you still have the problem of going to the bathroom, you still have the problem of sleeping, and you don't have fixed solutions to any of them. And because you don't, you're in this constant jumble and juggling. And I think that it can actually cause and make mental health issues significantly worse. Let's say you go to buy some medicine and you don't have an ID, and then you can't buy the medicine, and then you don't have an address, so they can't mail it to you. And even if they give it to you and you put it in your bag and you go somewhere and you sleep, the next day somebody may have stolen your bag and there goes your medicine. So, I mean, there's a part of it that's actually excruciatingly difficult. It's just but the flip side of it is that you're not subject, you don't have a boss, you don't have a wife, you don't have children. I mean, you can, of course, but you're just not a part of a system. And you don't observe its laws, and you don't work within its hierarchy, and you don't, all of that stuff. So there isn't that same kind of bondage that you would have, say, in a family or in a corporation or whatever. You can move, you can, you don't necessarily have to worry about kids and feeding them. It's just a different, it's kind of like a cowboy thing. It's kind of a rugged individualism kind of thing. So I'm just trying to say that, whereas somebody who's in a home has the freedom to write a book, or, the freedom to have their things in the same place and not worry about them. So there are freedoms that come with having a home that are really quite extraordinary, and you can't lose sight of that either.
And you'd say freedom with wealth too, right? That's the accumulation of wealth.
Wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it is wealth for sure. But some of it is just, like having a room, even if it's not a house, just having a room where, you can put your things, walk out, close the door, and know that when you come back, you'll find things as you put them there, if you will, if that's permanence. It's like a stable geography.
So when you think about impermanence, I know that you mentioned that impermanence feels loveless for you, right? That's what.
What feels loveless?
Impermanence. The word, when I mention you, the word impermanence for you, what What do you think about when you think about impermanence? What is it?
I mean, I mean, it's almost a semantic discussion at some level. Permanent, impermanent, stable, not stable, eternal, fleeting, or
I'm thinking
temporary.
more about the creation aspect. I mean, I'm interested in how it impacts your creation and you know your relationship with it in the process of creation.
I mean, I think it's absolutely necessary, because I think virtually anything that we create is about giving form to an idea or an emotions or relationships that are not defined or not clear or not articulated. So we are, for example, the next project that I want to work on is about the Uyghur population in China. And this is a Muslim minority that the Chinese state is literally deleting almost, right? Taking away their family, their culture, their faith, everything, and just reducing them into obedient, communist um, vassals. So they're disappearing in these prisons, in these big concentration camps. And they're not a particularly visible people, and they're up against a very powerful system, structure, the Communist Party of China, which is, both an ideology, it's also a capitalist, it's all of these horrible things. So you, as an artist or as a human being, you don't want to permit that kind of systemic destruction of people. So you create, you affirm, you speak, you do all the things that you do. You give as much as you can voice and face and hope and affirmation to people who are on the margins again, right? To the impermanent. It's not even impermanent. It's they're being destroyed, And so for me, it keeps on coming back to community, Artemis, because the things we create can be easily destroyed. But if the community that we're a part of is alive, and if the community has a soul and a spirit, that's the source of, that's the true source of permanence in the way I understand it. In some places they build an enormous statue of Saddam Hussein or whatever, but sooner or later these statues crumble and fall, and eras change and so on. But the true permanence is rooted in the communities to which we belong, and that's where our work goes. That's what gives value to our work. That's where things get exchanged. And I think that my goal as an artist increasingly is to be in conversation with the community of people who care about the things that I care about, and who can teach me and guide me and protect the values that I have or that I share with them. So that's where I'm at.
Beautiful. So you see a sense of eternity in communities.
I do.
You do.
Not necessarily eternity. I mean, I'm also not that wedded to being eternal. I don't need to be eternal. I need to be alive. And I need to feel and be in loving relationships with the world that I'm a part of. And if that love lasts for a day, that's good enough, or an hour, or even for an encounter. And if it becomes part of something bigger, then that's also wonderful and great. But it doesn't need to be eternal.
Yeah, I need the sense of transform. It may transform, but what I mean is that it it's somewhere, right? It feels like when you
Yes.
talk, it's somewhere. It might not be the way you presented it at first, but it's somewhere.
Yes. And most importantly, in language. I think language is the I think language is this sort of miraculous gift that humans have, medium. I think it like transmits energy literally. It's like we don't think of language as a physical force field, but it is. As a life force, it is a life force. As a death force, it can be as well. So, I, for me, language is the um, ultimate instrument through which we convert energy, exchange energy. And so it's like the currency, it's the most important currency that we have. Um, and it's what binds us as a community and, does all of these things. We are able, you and I, to face each other by virtue of language and names and things like that. So I think that if you look, for instance, at the Persian language, when you're reading Rumi or Sadi or Hafiz or whoever, that language is, it has been preserved through centuries by thousands of people. And, it's almost like an oral tradition. And even if it's a few verses that you still hold on to, it's a spiritual thing, to be endowed with language and to be able to convert your thoughts, your emotions, your ideas into language, right? That's where you get some sense of permanence. Imagine not being able to have a language, not having the language. How would you? It's terrifying.
A lot. Not having a language is terrifying. Can you say more? What do you mean by not having a language?
If I want to tell you, Artemis, I love you, and I can't find the words, and it's hard. It's so much harder.
What about
It's
your body? Can
huh?
what about your body? Can your body say it without words?
Yes, I mean the body is a language of its own. It's like
Oh,
yes, but what I mean is that language, body, touch, right? Talk about permanence, right? Because as long as we are in these bodies, we both have a sense of permanence and impermanence. As by virtue of being incorporated as a being. And then you see all these other beings, right? What's the connection? That's where if those other beings are terrifying and they're out to destroy you, you're constantly dealing with impermanence. But if they're a part of you, there's a sense of permanence.
so would you talk about death? What is death for you?
That, I mean, at some fundamental level, I don't think death exists. Um, at some fundamental level, I think that by virtue of what we do, we live in different ways, in different dimensions. Our spirits don't die. Our bodies, of course, do, but our spirits, our work, our energy lives on in different ways. But then there's also, I've obviously dealt with death in terms of my family and all of that. And I mean, I think the hard part, there's this book I have somewhere in here by Robert J. Lifton, I think his name is. It's about death and life and life and death. I think the worst place that death can exist is in your life while you're alive. It's like we live with this constant sense of, expiring, coming to an end, and I think that's a construct as much as anything, right? All the big world religions offer you something after death of one kind or another. Heaven, hell, all of these things are constructed around the idea of death. And even if you push it more, there's this idea of heaven and earth. And then there's this idea of male and female. And then there is this idea of good and bad, right? And all heaven is good, men are good, all of that gets one category. And then women, who are the source of life, the earth, all of this stuff is viewed as temporary and impermanent, right? That this isn't the real thing. The next thing is the real thing. And so there are ways in which we construct ideas of certainty and permanence philosophically, religiously, right? That I think are really problematic. Because then the womb becomes, the womb, which is the woman's body, which brings life into the earth, is treated as dirty and contaminated. And the tomb, the grave, which is seen as the womb into the heavens, becomes sanctified. And that's a complete miscasting of everything, And so men are constructed as a form. The idea of men and power and the state, it is all rooted in death, right? It is, you have the authority to kill. You control the grave. You have the authority to say, oh, you're going to heaven and you're going to hell. All of this stuff is constructed around death. And all of this is an illusion. So we need to do away with it, I think. And live more fully and more deeply with less division.
And time, would you talk about time too? I know that
time becomes the same thing. It's like, I do a lot of work and thinking around the idea of time, right? Because time is, I think it's the most powerful concept that's out there. And the way it works is that, think of it in terms of a parking meter, right? Every dimension of our lives is governed by time. It's the ultimate instrument of control, right? You park your car somewhere, you have to put in a buck to buy time. And then as soon as you've bought time, it starts ticking away and you're constantly running out of time. So we're in this constant relationship. Rent is the same, right? At the end of every month, you have to pay your rent, another parking meter. And if you don't, you run out of space and eviction and all of these things. So time is etched into every dimension every relationship that we have as a debt relationship, because it is what governs space, really. Allocations and distribution of space are often made through time. So it's a very big concept, and a very problematic concept as well, that we should do without. Yeah, I don't like time. I don't like being bound by time. It's an imposition. And I always have trouble with it because jobs are all about time, 9 to 5, da 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 da. Rent is about time, mortgages are about time, 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 time. And talk about impermanence, right? Because as long as we are in a relationship with time, we are impermanent, right? You parked your car, tick, 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 and then violation, fine, 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 and right? So, I mean, where time is at the root, the way we envisage it, the way we construct it, the way we use it in our daily lives, the way states use it to control the fluctuations of currency and interest rates and all of these things. It's the Uber concept, and it's the concept that needs to be broken down and rebuilt in a way that's more life-centric. Let me show you something. My latest collection. I collect parking meters. Right? Because it's everything, right? Everything is in this. Everything. And in fact, this is for an art project, but it's like, time expired, violation, feed it here, It's like the human face also. So here's its nose. See its nose, its eyes. It's watching you. It bites you.
Exactly. So, I tell you what I understand now from the point of view, my understanding of impermanence and permanence. And I want you to maybe, give your thoughts about my understanding. So for me, impermanence is actually life. But it's really interesting the way you see it. So anyway, I explain you, entering in the discussion with you, impermanence for me is life, in the sense that if there is control, if I'm afraid of it, I tend to control. But if I let myself travel, let flow, or let go of my control, I can listen to the universe, right? I can and participate with, the universe. And permanence is exactly the opposite. It's control. It's when I'm so afraid of this space, of possibility, that I just construct my own life. I construct time, I construct home, I construct stability, I amass money, wealth, and love disappears. So it's very interesting when you talk, because obviously there is suffering, no matter what I do. There is suffering, right? But in one is as if I flow with the suffering, and it's not that I suffer less. I'm not sure if I suffer less. But in the other is just not only I keep suffering, but I miss life. I completely miss life. But when I hear you talk, what is fascinating, which completely changed my understanding of impermanence, is that, and permanence, is that you bring in the concept of love, and you bring in this. So it feels to me as if you see, um, you don't see life as a beginning, middle, and end. So there is a fluidity that is an infinity, it feels like, that is non-existent in my understanding. Uh, but I would love to adopt your understanding but it's this fluidity, right? There is a sense of there is no end, there's no real beginning, and there is no real end. And so there is, and there is no time neither, right? These are all construct, and that so you so when you see permanence and impermanence, it feels like it's the opposite, right? It seems that the construct is more the impermanence, and the permanence something that you're allowed to look for, right? To integrate into this life as a bathroom, as you said, or shower, or a space to live, a room where you put your things and you come back to it and it's there. So yeah.
I think, I mean, your way of seeing life in a, I think as biological beings, we are constantly needing to replenish ourselves. We need food, we need water, shelter, those things. So we are always under some degree of pressure and threat and stress. And when we amass a lot of wealth, or when we hoard, I think that hoarding is also a measure of insecurity, right? And the more you hoard, the less safe you feel, almost. And I think that the act of hoarding does that. It it's it weakens us in a way, because you also have to live with the projection of your own being onto others, right? So if you're a hoarder, and then you subconsciously are living in a world that is defined by the way you live, right? In which everyone is a hoarder or a potential hoarder. And so you end up living in a very insecure world, and one that the more you try to secure yourself, the more you hoard, the more insecure you become and your environment becomes. And I kind of feel that that's like one of the deadly flaws of capitalism, is that it's that you are wanting a guarantee of, total security at the expense of doing what we are doing to the planet, right? My friend Abu was talking to me the other day, almost a year ago, and he was saying that he'd been talking to some big philosopher, and there's some, if you consider the amount of money that rushes around the world in search of revenue, in search of more money, right? It's like trillions of dollars that's running around the world seeking returns. Well, that's just not sustainable. That model is not sustainable, right? And so we really need a new framing of what it means for us to live together, which which really does away with everything that we've had since the time of Plato and Aristotle. I mean, every construct that we've built is now, look at what we're doing to the planet, all those ideas are wrong. Our ideas of ourselves as the individual is wrong. Our constructs of the state, wrong. Our ideas of the nation, wrong. I mean, they're just profoundly, they're not just wrong, they're aborted things. They're grotesque. And so, yeah, they've allowed us to come as far as we have, but they're not going to allow us to cross the path, to go past these massive barriers and limits that life on earth is putting before us. And so there's no question then that we are not life-centric. We have not been life-centric as a species. We've been death-centric, right? And death is what makes us feel stable and secure. That's why the military-industrial complex is our security, right? It is about death. It's not about life. So these are dead systems in which we live somehow. And we fulfill the needs of these dead systems that are ticking away. And we just have to constantly feed it. This is going on in our heads all the time. It's like, oh my God, it's just, so we have to rethink it. We have to reconfigure it. We have to reframe it. And it's not going to be easy. It's probably going to need to collapse before it can happen. But I think there are a lot of people who are now thinking about, the organizational design of the world and how disastrous it is and how much better it can be. I hope. Who knows?